Hi, everybody, and thank you for taking the time and for listening. So I didn't say that I was leading the largest transformation at Westpac, mainly because that's not the kind of thing I would ever say. But certainly I would like to tell you a little bit of the story of what we've been through. So this is a presentation in two parts. The first is going to be depressing and horrible, and it's going to be disempowering. And the second, hopefully, will be a little bit less so. So let's start off with one of my favorite quotes, and it's an old quote. This guy called Melvin Conway came up with a fantastic, we eventually became Conway's Law, that says that organizations that design systems and or software, if you will, are constrained to produce outcomes and solutions that reflect the complexity of the organizations in which they were created. Now, in this conversation that we're having now, I'd like you to keep that in mind as we go. So our journey started about 18 months ago. I joined Westpac on the 14th of April of 2015. And shortly thereafter, as you do as a new exec, and I'll have to put up my hand and say, hi, I'm Dawie and I'm a banking executive. And don't hold it against me. Don't hold it against me. We had our first town hall in June of that year. And in that town hall, started talking about how people are feeling, and the engagement was a little bit flat in the room. And I couldn't figure it out. Until right at the end when we had question time, we did a whole bunch of questions. Some people asked me, how am I enjoying New Zealand? You know, the normal arbitrary questions. And then one guy at the back of the room, and it was a big room like this, 200 odd people in it, put up his hand and I said, oh yeah, great, hopefully we get a good question. And he said, Dawie, I'd just like to know, how long is your contract? And that's when I knew that our problem was not a method problem. How many of you have done MBAs? How many of you aspire to do an MBA? How many people in management in this room? Hopefully there'll be many people in management in some form. It's not a sin, you're allowed to be in management if somebody has to do that job. I'm going to save you some money if ever you wanted to do an MBA. And here is an entire MBA on one page. And let's walk through how strategies are normally created. So we have a team of executives in a bank. They are the leadership, the purple block. They are heavily coached in how to lead and how to manage, and in the scientific practices that makes it possible for us to run large organizations. They get together, preferably off-site somewhere. They do some firewalking, or some obstacle building, or some sort of team-building exercise, and they come up with an aspiring vision. And that aspiring vision is very quickly elaborated into the strategy. And this strategy is that guiding light that takes us to what is our market, how do we want to compete in that market, and how do we want to make money? Great. Then we bring back that strategy, wholly formed as it is, and we chuck it over the fence to some people and we say, execute. And people who have been classically trained in management take that, and the first thing they do is they extract from the vision and from the strategy, what are those key things that we have to be able to do well? Now, in the software industry, what would those things be? We need to architect well. We need to analyze well. We need to code well. We need to test well. And in the end, for our solutions and our product to be able to scale, we need to productize and productionize well. All right? Then we head off and we go find people who do each of those individual things. And we bring them back and we say, we're nearly ready. And then the big C word steps in the room and it says, how do we control all of this? Then we create structures, and we put these people into structures, and we eventually end up with a fully baked organization that is ready to execute our grand vision. And then we end up, as Depeche put it, having to fix our culture. So today we're going to talk about what happens when hypothetically we took this well-time-honored process that has been taught in virtually every MBA school since MBA schools have existed and turn it on its head and ask the questions differently. So this is the process that was followed to create what became the tech organization for Westpac in New Zealand. And you will have followed the logic that said doing all those steps would virtually inevitably lead us to an organizational structure that looks like this, where I have like skills grouped together for ease of management, where I have architects architecting happily in their box, where I have analysts happily analyzing and developers happily developing, and never the twain shall meet. but they're well managed and controlled. So why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? Well, the problem is because as soon as we organize like that, we tend to create an execution method that looks like this. So now for all of the waterfall haters in the room, do not blame the method. Blame the hundreds of years worth of management science that have led us to create organizations which by the design of the organizations themselves are doomed to create the systems of control and management and eventually the products that reflect the complexity of the organizations that design them. So, there we were, 18 months ago. We had one of the prettiest waterfalls I've ever seen in my entire life. This thing was shone to a high gloss. I can hear some of my team laughing. Yeah. If you're in my team, you shouldn't be in this room. You should be hearing some new stuff from other people. And when we took a quick look, we did a Gemba on our waterfall. And Gemba has a couple of key principles. Go see, ask why, show respect. It was easy to go see. It was very easy to ask why, but it was really tough to show respect. Because our process, in its highest abstracted form, had at least 14 different significant handoffs in it. Each of those handoffs, for those of you who've operated in this way, would attract at least 1 working day's worth of governance in preparation, at least a day's worth of working governance in submission. And if you were lucky to get through it one time, that was 28 working days that were wasted just in talking about the work, not in doing the work. 28 working days. What's that, 6 weeks? Wow, a month and a half. Okay. And then the next set of problems. This is a fantastic graph. If there's a gentleman called Capers-Jones who is famous for being one of the world's most vociferous defenders of the waterfall method. And for many, many years, he would do the study on software quality and execution and take the metrics and compare original requirement to final requirement and so forth. And eventually in I think it was 2012 or 2013, Capers stopped producing these graphs that I'm about to show you now because he eventually figured out that his very own data was proving that what he was saying was nonsense. And this is my favorite graph because it talks about the cost of quality over phase or time in a project. And it talks about how expensive it is to change your mind as you go down a waterfall. Does anybody here have lean expertise or lean training? Yep, some lean training. The Toyota production system is where lean started, or it's the first industrialized application of lean. And in the Toyota production system, if you go to one of the production lines, there's a fantastic red cord, used to be a cord, now it's a button, that runs down the production line. And as people stand in their boxes, they literally have boxes, white line and white line, piece of work arrives on the one side, take your piece of work, do what you need to do with it, put it down on the production line again, and off it goes, or you screw your bolts into the car, or whatever it is that you happen to do. And that red cord is called an and-on cord, and the job of the and-on cord is to empower every single person on the production line, when they spot a quality problem, to pull the cord and stop the production line. And the entire factory grinds to a halt. So after the Second World War, General Motors was in some serious trouble, so off they went and they kept on sending people to tour Toyota factories. Now the Toyota team are quite smart, so they spotted these American executives, easily identified by the fact that they wore Italian wool suits and pointy shiny shoes in the factory. And eventually they stopped these guys and they said, "Hey, where are you from?" They said, "Oh, we can't really talk about it, but we're from GM." And the Toyota guy said, "Look, you don't have to come and take photos, and you don't have to spy on the factory. Why don't we just give you the book? Here's the book. This is our production system, off you go." And General Motors ran off and they created a plant in Detroit, and they built it a carbon copy of a Toyota factory, and they put all these people in that factory, and the cars started rolling off, and the quality problems started coming, and customers hated their cars, and how often do you think that production line stopped? Never. And the reason it never stopped is the same reason why the cost of quality in a waterfall is so high, is that nobody ever feels empowered to pull the red cord. So how does that manifest when our business has a great idea and they throw it into our highly polished software development lifecycle that looks like this? Well, there comes the idea, flows downhill through every single gate of governance, 28 days worth of governance, and at the end something falls out the other end, and invariably the world explodes. Either for technical reasons, or because, quite frankly, what was built is barely recognizable from what was asked for. And why do you think that is? Mainly because when the thing breaks, at its most expensive point, everybody is running for cover. We just put it into production. It took us, on average, 9 to 18 months to put that in. It's cost us millions. Who's going to get fired? All right. That's depressing. Why else are these handoffs a problem? And again, the lean world storms to our rescue with a fantastic little formula. And the formula says that wait time is percentage busyness, or busy time, over percentage of idle time. It's really simple. When you interpret it, it means that if you have people who are 50% or 80%, let's call it 80%, how many of you need to be recovered by 80% on your timesheets at the end of a week, yeah? Yeah, most organizations I've ever been in, 80%. It means that by definition, by cramming someone's backlog pipe 80% full, every 1 hour task will attract 4 hours of wait. So now not only do I have 28 days of handoff, I have also taken every task and multiplied it by 4. 9 to 18 months on average delivery time. And let's talk about this whole timesheet process that was mentioned earlier. I remember quite fondly doing timesheets myself. Very fondly. Normally work like this. Friday afternoon rolls around, and I spent an entire week doing, I don't know, stuff. And I know that if I don't get my timesheet in on Monday, I'm going to appear on some manager's red list for being a naughty boy and not having captured my timesheets. So what do? I sit down, my spreadsheet, and I go, what are those 5 projects I'm meant to be working on? And I write them down. I say, how many hours do I have? I have 40. What is 40 times 8? Or 40 times 80%? 32. All right, let's split that across 5, and I submit. But that only happens once, right? I'm a coder. Why would I do that many times? So I write a macro. And I just let this happen automatically. Now, the interesting thing about enterprises is that in the background, those hours get multiplied by a rate. And that rate gets applied to a schedule in a project time system. And that time then gets applied to however money I have available and is then reflected as a percentage completion on my project. How many lies are in that chain? Right? And then we have executive meetings. We spend hours and hours and hours creating thick packs of project documentation, portfolio documentation, enterprise documentation. And all the execs sit around and they say, oh, we're running behind our baseline on this execution. And it becomes the science of running our enterprise based on the fundamental lie that I don't really care what I put in my timesheets in the first place. Then there's the problem that the timesheet, by definition, is a measure of input, not a measure of output. That's depressing stuff, isn't it? Wow. And interestingly, when we did that engagement survey that Depesh was speaking about, we opened up a can of worms like you've never seen before. The survey we used happened to be a McKinsey tool. It was called the Organizational Health Index. It's very similar to a Connexa or any of the other types. And over 43 different dimensions of organizational culture, it said that a day in the life of one of my people sucks in 43 dimensions. And the results came back and they said, hey, there are 2,500 organizations that have done this survey. And out of the 2,500 of them, you rate in the 4th quartile. If I have to, I'll elaborate. There is no lower quartile than 4. All right. So fundamentally, it sucks. Okay. And having described how this method works and how these processes work, you could feel it sucking the life right out of you, not so? Think about the day in the life of a guy who is a highly trained coder, whose entire day consists of getting a spec, writing some code to what he thinks matches the spec, and then passing it off when he thinks he's done, passing it off down to some other guy who's going to do the testing. Here's how the conversation goes on Friday night when he gets home to his partner. He says, honey, I had a good week. And his partner says, wow, glad to hear it. How did your week go? And he says, honey, you know, I completed a whole bunch of specs. And even better, at the end of the week, I was able to be 80% recovered. Wow. I could just feel my blood getting up, right? I just want to get at it. What would the opposite of that look like? And what is the missing ingredient? The opposite of that looks like this. I get home on Friday night, and I sit down with my partner, and I say, honey, this week I had a great week. You've heard the story before. And she says, really? That's great to hear. Tell me about your week. And you say, this week we created something that we gave to our customers. And the first feedback we got within this week was that this has allowed someone to put their family into that home they've been aspiring to. Or this has allowed us to create the ability for us to send one of our children off to be educated. Or it's changed the way I run my business. Now that's something to aspire to. Now when you're a large bank in New Zealand, think about the fact that potentially 25% of the population is touched by these things that we build. So the ability for us to pivot and get into the space where we're talking about those great customer outcomes is a 25% of the population conversation. How empowering is that? Or would you rather be 80% recovered? And this is why it matters. Because when I give those things to customers, I would like them to recognize what it is that they need. And I would like them to be delighted by those things that we give them. Not turning around and saying, what are those Westpackers smoking? And why did they build this thing? Isn't it much better if we all understand what we were trying to achieve in the first place? Yeah, indeed. So, we sat back as a leadership team and we said, how do we change this conversation? We understand what the pillars of our strategy are. And the interesting thing about banks, and I'm sure there are other banking folks here, is that banking strategies between banks are virtually identical because we all do the same stuff with the same customers. They're virtually identical. And yet we're scrambling to win on the basis of those strategies. And the missing part is that when we set our aspiration for our strategies, we set them on the basis of the pillars and not on the basis of the glue that sticks them together. And that glue is the culture of the organization in which we execute. Now, why do I believe culture is important? When we go about changing our organizations, and to use the worst phrase in history, transforming our organizations, we invariably focus on the blocks. We'll easily go to the end. Depesh said them all. I mentioned to him as he walked out just now that I probably don't need to speak because he said most of what needs to be said. We often focus on the mechanics. We focus on the method. I'm going to sprinkle some agile on it. That was a beautiful quote. Sprinkle some agile on it and my flat cake will rise. Or we need to be more efficient, so we're going to reduce our headcount. How often have you seen those things, and how often have you 2 or 3 years later had to come back and do it again? And it's because if you do not focus on the culture, the rubber band that sticks your entire organization together, it will contract. Entropy will bring it back to the state it was in before you started. So with that as a hypothesis, the leadership team had to do a fair amount of introspection. And the first piece of introspection we needed to do is we needed to look ourselves in the mirror and acknowledge to ourselves that right now we have no idea what we're talking about. But as long as we keep that as our guiding light, let's continuously go and learn, not only from each other, but also from others. Let's go and see. Let's ask why, and let's show respect along every step of the way. And so it was that we went to see numbers of scores of organizations, both here and around the world, and we asked thousands of questions. And when we came back, it was with the stunning conclusion that we still know nothing. But with the absolute drive to approach it in a way, and here's a famous quote from General Norman Schwarzkopf, in a way that acknowledges that the soldier at the front line is always right, until proven otherwise. The default position cannot be that we know more or better than people who do these jobs on a daily basis. So what happened? With that in mind, we decided to take this classic strategy, design, execution methodology and just change one arrow directionally, 2 arrows in fact. And we said, what happens if we've done our leadership thing, we have our grand vision, we know what we need to do well. How about if the next question is, what does the culture need to be to allow us to do that well? Why don't we reshape the rubber band first? And from there, go into those tools, methods, techniques that allow us to behave in the way that we believe is the right culture. And from there, get our people engaged in understanding how that works. And only once that is done have we actually created the strategy. So how did that all work out? We quite quickly figured out that what we were lacking is the ability to collaborate. We were not having good quality conversations, not with each other, not with our customers, not with, and this is a dreadful phrase, the business. We were not one thing, we were multiple things. We were individual silos within an organization. The next thing that we couldn't do is we couldn't learn. There was no way for us to iterate ideas quickly and get the feedback that we needed to delight our customers. Now, I use an analogy here, and it's fallen flat on about 4 occasions, but I'm going to try again. How many of you have seen a 10-meter snake? Yep, still New Zealand. No one's seen a 10-meter snake in New Zealand. There's one. You're from South Africa. That doesn't count. All right, a 10-meter snake is probably about as long as this stage is wide. That's 10 meters. You've got that firmly in your mind, 10-meter snake, yeah? Now picture a 4-lane highway. We do have those. 4-lane highway, it's just shy of peak hour. Cars are whizzing by. And I take my beautiful, polished 10-meter snake, and I send him to the other side of the highway. What are the chances he's going to get hit by a car? 100%. And then my beautiful, polished snake is shoe leather. He's dead. Now take that same snake, or rather, don't take the same snake. Take 10 small snakes and let them loose on the highway. And the chances are some of them will get hit by cars. But there is an even better chance that half of them will make it across the road. And that's the context that we started setting for the organization is, do we continuously want to be writing off tens and hundreds of millions worth of dollars of project money? Or would we rather be generating return iteratively in the market on the basis of ideas we can validate? So when you're having an executive conversation, which on the one hand has you writing off tens of millions of dollars, and on the other hand generating delight and value, that is not a hard sell. So what happened then? We then had to acknowledge to ourselves that we have no idea what that culture needs to look like. Now, some people call me a romantic, some people call me a hippie, but at the end of the day, with what I said earlier, the only people who can understand how to execute our vision are the people who need to do the work. So we embarked on creating a process of co-creating from the ground up what we wanted our culture to look like. It's no point asking me, who is on the 4th floor in Takatai Square with a view over the harbor, what I believe the execution culture needs to be. The only people you can ask are those people who have to live it. So we created a little process of leading inquiry. And what that meant was a fairly hard questionnaire, but a questionnaire that led people to examples of fantastic cultures around the world. And the usual suspects were there. Google was there, Facebook was there, LinkedIn was there. There were also a couple of unusual ones. Some airlines, the military in some cases, but most importantly, it led people to acknowledge these ideas. And the human brain is amazing. The human brain is incapable of disregarding an idea once it's been seen. Hence the saying, what has been seen cannot be unseen. It has to thereafter make a conscious decision whether or not to apply what it has seen. And the point we needed to get to was the point where the entire team was making conscious decisions. They were not just walking around ignorant. So we used a simple model. Our model is called ELSA. It speaks about creating events. And these have to be events around compelling things. One of them was, what should our culture look like? And the room was, again, about this size, and started with a simple question. What does a great day at work feel like? What does that day feel like? And inevitably, we would get the classic 12-step program. First step is acknowledging the problem. We would inevitably get the denial. Oh, but Dawie, you have to acknowledge that some parts of our culture are great. How many dimensions did I say earlier we measured? 43, and they all sucked. And when the realization hit that actually what we had become is we had become tolerant of things that we should not tolerate. It was when the leadership started respecting the commitment it takes for people to spend 8 hours of every waking day in each other's company and in the organization, that the penny drops that says if we don't fix this, what we are not doing is fulfilling our very first responsibility as leaders, is making sure that these people come here and are able to have a great day. So the first step is create the event. The second is change the language. Start speaking of those things you want to aspire, or you aspire to, those things that you want. Don't think about and don't speak about those things that you don't want. If you're a cyclist or a mountain biker, especially a new one of the very first lessons that is taught, I used to be a mountain biker, please don't judge. One of the first things that you're taught is do not look at the rock that you're trying to miss. Look at the path that you're trying to follow, because otherwise you will hit the rock. Change the language. Start using the words that take us where we want to go. Then create the structures, the informal structures that allow us to talk about those things and to explore those things. So we created an organization, or not an organization, a set of teams that were called the Culture Champions. And they had a very specific job. They're not a secret society. Their job is to take the thoughts that we have, take them to the water cooler, take them to the team and test them and get the feedback so that we can iterate. And we can do one ELSA after another so that we can get it right over time. And the last thing is the agency, is make it explicit that people have permission to get on with it. That they do not have to check in with us. This is not something that is being done for management. This is something that is being done for all of us. And then let it loose. And what happened? So humans are fantastic. Humans aspire to very similar things no matter where you are. And the first iteration of the ELSA came up and people said, these are words, ownership, growth, integrity, collaboration, achievement, and fun, that we would like to see reflected in our day-to-day working environment. And they went off and they tested those words. Some words got discarded, some words got amplified, but we got back together and we said, okay, that's all fair enough. It's easy to create the words. Why don't we make some posters with the words on and stick them all over the halls and we'll just call this done? How many of you have seen that for corporate values? All of us. So that's not where this ends. The next question is, for each of those words, what does it mean? How do you behave when you value fun, both in yourself and in others? How do I behave when I'm encouraging it? How do I behave when I'm collaborating? And what is my expectation of others? Now, I'll tell you a little story about one of these values, actually a couple of the values. I was down in Wellington one day with my development team, and I was doing a classic banking executive thing, which is to walk around on your mobile phone having important conversations. And the important conversation started getting a bit confidential, so I found a meeting room, glass room, opened it up, slipped inside, closed the room, sat down, having my important meeting, because important banking executive. And one of the project teams came walking up to the glass and knocked on the glass. And how do important banking executives respond? You've all seen this before. It's the executive salute. And their scrum coach was a fantastic guy by the name of Jimmy Janlin, who most of you probably know quite well. And he was standing out there with his very stern Nordic face on. And he walked away. And when I walked out of that room, Jimmy was at the door and he said, do you have any idea how disrespectful that was towards that team? I said, wow, Jimmy, I don't. Explain it to me. And he walked me through the emotions that the team had experienced because my arrogance had got in the way of them doing these very things that they valued. It got in the way of them achieving. It got in the way of them collaborating. They had that room arranged for a stand-up. And there I was sitting. I didn't wear a suit at that time, but there I was sitting in my executiveness doing this. And he took me, didn't quite take me by the hand, but he led me to the team, and I immediately apologized to them. And I said, I am sorry, that behavior was unacceptable, and no one in the organization is above these values and these behaviors that we've defined for ourselves. Now, interestingly, this is not the first time that I've seen a journey like this. In a previous organization, we went through a similar thing, and I'm going to read you some of the values that they came up with. And you'll realize that they're not really that different, because these are basic human needs. So we are a team. By allowing ourselves to self-organize across all levels and celebrating the success of the team, we unlock power greater than any individual. It's all about people. By fostering ownership and trust, instead of command and control, energy and passion in people are unleashed. We are proud to put our name on it. By putting quality first in everything we do and by taking pleasure in our craft, we ensure great and reliable products. So it speaks to the fact that everybody aspires to come work in a place every single day where they can know that their inputs are valued, that they're part of a greater outcome, and that they can trace their part in that greater outcome when it is in fact realized. So what were the capabilities that we needed to focus on? We needed to not only focus on these behavioral things we've just spoken about, but an interesting thing happens when organizations set a cultural aspiration and have to go back to working in a method that doesn't support it. What happens when I say we value collaboration and you have to go and sit in your box and wait for a spec and hand off across a gate? What happens? Well, quite quickly, there is an emotional dissonance, a reality vacuum that says, but we've just said we want this, and yet we're doing that. So virtually immediately, it became necessary for us to start teaching those practices, and you'll notice I haven't really said the word agile yet, have I? We needed to start teaching those practices that allow people to behave in the way in which they aspire to behave. And those practices virtually invariably come from the worlds of lean, the world of agile, and they're all about the collaboration. Top down, there was a fair amount of mirror gazing. Because when you're in a world where teams become self-managing, where the backlog isn't yours, you as a leader can feel redundant really, really quickly. Until you realize that your job has just become not to lead, but to serve. Your job has become not to make sure your developers are doing things, but to ensure that your developers are able to do great things. Your job is not to make sure that analysts are analyzing, but are the best equipped and the best trained to be able to analyze in a teaming context. So how did that change our structure? Firstly, simplicity by design, not by accident. And secondly, method driven by the culture. Today, if you were to walk the floors at Westpac, you will not see the waterfall. And in fact, as of yesterday, you won't see timesheets either. What you will see is you'll see cross-functional, Joe likes that. Sorry, Joe, it took a bit longer than I promised, but it's done. You'll see cross-functional teams who work with backlogs that are prioritized together with product owners. And the number one question that comes from virtually every single person in that team is this the next best thing we should be doing for our customer? Not, is this the thing that we're doing because Dawie said so, or because the head of product wants it? What are our customers saying about these things? Now, there's a fantastic quote from Ben Horowitz, from Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capitalist. And the quote goes that the world is full of bankrupt companies with great cultures. So it was extremely important in the enterprise context to be able to prove these things. Now, what are those fears when we start talking about delivery at velocity, releasing every day, get stuff to customers, ship the idea? The fears that come to mind really quickly are, what happens to stability? What happens if we break it? The second fear is, what does it cost to learn these things? So this slide over here represents a couple of interesting statistics. The top, your left, my right slide, talks about a measure we created called structural efficiency. And this measure essentially measures the number of cents in every dollar that go towards solving a problem. So if we have a problem we want to solve, I throw some money at it, what is the percentage of that money that is solving the problem? And we first started measuring this, and the result was startling. 28 cents in the dollar was going to the problem. The other 72 was going to 28 days of governance, overhead, quality gates, and so forth. Then we threw new culture into the mix, and we let people get on with working in new ways. And that orange line represents how the efficiency changed for those teams that tried it first. They suddenly hit just shy of 60%. I think it was 54 or 55% in efficiency. So a doubling in efficiency by changing the culture in which we work and letting people at it. And then over time, as more and more people started adopting the empowerment that comes with being allowed to pick how they work, the whole organization's efficiency started climbing. Now this matters because that reflects, or that represents $100 million worth of project activity. So we had gone from where our $100 million would have bought us $28 million worth of value to where today at least half of it is value, and we're trending steadily upwards. Think about taking your money to an investment consultant, and his first response to you is, sure, I'll take your money. 72 cents of that goes towards my Aston Martin and my secretary and my admin process, and the other 20 cents I'll invest for you and you'll be fine. So how is it that in the new capability space in an enterprise, we could tolerate that conversation. The next interesting thing that happened was that in the run space, which doesn't feel like it belongs in this conversation, people started trying stuff. And you'll notice the cryptic definitions that talk about small thing, rethink some stuff. At the end of the year, this $200 million pot had been reduced by $15 million just because people were iterating their ideas live. I said, I think this is a good idea, let's try it. Now stability, oh my goodness, this has to be a stability nightmare. Surely you must be breaking the bank every day. And the answer to that is strangely not. In 2015, we had over 8,000 minutes of frontline affected downtime, and that's a very particular definition, is I care about the amount of time that customers cannot be served at the front line. Over 8,000 minutes in 2015. And in this past year, 1,200 minutes. A nearly 8-fold improvement in the frontline availability time. And then there's my favorite metric of all, the engagement. I know these surveys are often a little bit trite, but at the end of the day, when you have bills to pay, they're quite useful to show that what you're doing is working. We reran a subset of that OHI survey about, what was it, in April? And we came back with a massively startling result, where we went from the 4th quartile to indicating a clear 1st quartile result for engagement. And there were even dimensions we did nothing about that had improved, just because people basically felt better about what it feels like to work in those teams. So interestingly, we're actually rerunning that survey today, and we'll get our next set of results. And I reckon that we'll probably come back in the top of the 2nd quartile just because a bit of the honeymoon phase is over. But certainly, where we are today, we're being much more respectful of the commitment people have made to us than what we have been in the past. Now, I often get asked this question, but Dawie, how do you get the executives to buy into this? And I have a very simple prescription for this. And that prescription is simply, there is no knight in shining armor who's going to ride across the horizon and is going to fix this for you. You have to do this for yourself. How do you do that? Well, try some stuff. Get some results. Take them to those executives, because there is nothing that an executive likes more than a tangible result. Then, and this is important, on the basis of those results, ask them for something. Because the minute you ask them for something and they agree to help, you've made them complicit. Then they have to pay attention. And then keep them informed as you go. Keep on coming back and saying, hey, remember that last conversation? On the basis of that, this is what we've learned. Let's keep going. I need something from you. Then importantly, when you do this, don't do it in secret. Share this with everybody because it makes it impossible to deny. Plausible deniability is the hiding place for executives. Make sure people know about these results. Make sure you involve them because they will be affected. So that eventually when this becomes your new way of being, no one needs to be convinced. They've seen the results, they've lived the results. So what have I shown you today? Have I showed you a magic bullet? I certainly haven't. I've just showed you what we've learned over 18 months and the fact that if you actually ask, people do know what a great day at work feels like. So I'll leave you with this quote, and this is by Sun Tzu, because we're running out of time quite quickly. And Sun Tzu said that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. And more importantly, tactics without strategy is the noise before your inevitable defeat. And what I haven't showed you is strategy, but what I have showed you is an entirely new bundle of tactics to get us there. And on that note, thank you so much for spending the time listening to our story, and I'll take any questions that you might have. Thank you.